Hello, and welcome to the Alchemists Inkwell.
This is your spiritual podcast for grounded people.
I'm Emily.
And I'm KristaLyn. And this week we're going to cover a pretty exciting topic about history and how well it was written.
Right? Yeah, so we hope you're doing okay, first and foremost, after this whole eclipse entering into Mercury retrograde energy. That is still the future for us recording here, so we're just sending love to that.
Can you hear
And so
my
is
dog
Jack,
whining?
apparently. Oh, poor
I
guy.
apologize. He just wants attention. And I'm giving it to him. Don't worry. If you're watching,
Yeah.
I'm leaning to the side because this is where the dog is and he's getting the scritches right now.
He deserves them. He had
He
surgery
does.
last week.
He
Let him
did.
get
He was
love.
such a trooper. He had surgery while the moon was in Capricorn, and I was just like, my poor little Scorpio. But it went really well.
Poor buddy.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it was self-inflicted, but still.
Mhm.
Okay.
Well, of course, during the moon in Capricorn, he has teeth removed, so that was fun.
Poor
Yeah.
guy. But yeah, we hope you're doing good. We hope we're doing good. We hope that everything went well.
We hope that eclipse wasn't quite as chaotic as it looks like it has the potential to be. But you can let us know. Oh,
Right?
look, you can almost see
Yeah.
Jack.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, there you go. But yeah, please let us know. Let us know in the comments of this video if you're watching on YouTube. Tell us how it went for you. Tell
Yeah.
us how it went for you. And there's not a lot until kind of we hit the next eclipse, really, astrology wise, right?
Yeah.
So
Things do,
we're
at
kind
least
of
for the
okay
next
for a
week.
sec.
Yeah, for the next week, it settles down a little bit. The sun will conjoin the north node, but we already had the eclipse. So the big punch from that is mostly around the eclipse instead. Yeah. So just hold on, you guys. It's going to be all right.
Hang tough.
Eventually.
You got this.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, as Krista mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about channeled history and misogyny and kind of how history was written a little bit today. This goes hand in hand, obviously, with forgotten storyteller stuff that we do, which is a lot of just creating stories that are high vibration and healing. But also it's something I've been doing a lot in my personal life, and it's something that we do on the trips that we're taking, which our first one is in like a month. So we're going to be doing some channeled history stuff on those trips as well. So we thought we would just talk about it. And it was an episode that was voted on by the patrons. So thank you, patrons. We appreciate you. Couple quick announcements just to get out of the way. Forgotten Storyteller pitches are open.
Yes.
Like, please pitch us. Please come hang out with us. Please write your book with us. We're really excited about it. This cohort's going to be super fun. It starts in June. I mean, it's basically if you have any sort of fiction book idea and you're like, I would like to write it, but I don't know. That's perfect. Pitch us. That's what we want.
That's what we're looking for. I'm so excited. I had put my little magnets into a perfect square and I squeezed them and ruined my square because I got that excited about pitches. So just so you know.
That's how much we love them.
Yes, that's how
pitches.
great it is.
Yeah, but basically, I mean, the Forgotten Storytellers, we help you write your fiction book in alignment with your astrology, your spirit guides, and how it's kind of equal parts a spiritual program as it is a book writing program. So not only will you get all the skills to write your book, which you can use over and over and over for the rest of your life to write whatever books you want, but you can also get all of the skills to clear out your blocks, live more spiritually, tap into your astrology, all sorts of fun stuff, which you can also use over and over and over.
Which is a big one.
Conquer doubt. Get rid of writer's block. We kick that one in the teeth real fast.
Yeah. And make a lot of friends who actually get it when you talk about stuff and you have a whole personal group of people who will be there supporting you.
Yeah, that's our favorite part. We're like everyone like bonds, right? It's the coolest thing. So anyway, Forgotten Storyteller pitches are open. Please pitch us. We would love that. We would love that so much. And you can say in your pitch form that you listen to the podcast too, and it makes us super excited. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. So anyway, yeah, let's talk about channeled history a little bit. Why it's important, I think, is really essential. Because when we're talking about channeled history, what I at least am talking about is speaking to people who lived in the ancient past or the past in some capacity. I tend towards ancient, but I've channeled people who are less ancient. I live in the center of cowboy country. So, I've talked to a lot of cowboys as well and gamblers, mobster guys and stuff. It's Tahoe. There's casinos and things like, it's
Tahoe.
Anyway. It's Tahoe. So I have talked to people in that capacity as well. But usually, at least for me, it tends towards the ancient past to kind of actually get the stories of what happened there and rewrite a lot of that narrative. Because history is all just stories. It's all just stories, and it's all been written by people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, not to quote Doctor Who, but I'm definitely going to quote Doctor Who and say we're all just stories in the end anyway. So you might as well make it a good one. But honestly, maybe the goal should be make it an honest one, and maybe be the person that you want to be in your story. If history would have been more like that, maybe we would have had a better time of the way history unfolded. Jack concurs.
What I will say with that as well, sorry, I took a bite of toast. I'm like nursing myself
I'm
back
convinced,
to life.
I'm convinced that my dad is my dog's favorite human being in the entire world. And I'm convinced that he's sensing the proximity of my parents coming to visit me today.
Oh, that's fair.
It wouldn't be the first dog who's been able to do that in our lives. So yeah.
I bet he is.
He's such a cutie.
But it's important to note too, obviously there's archaeological research and stuff like that goes on, but that is also not written by the losers most of the time. Like even the archaeological records is written by what people made the most impact on the land, what people were wealthy enough to build the certain things, what people died in certain places, which is also out of our control historically as well. In a lot of ways, which I'm not trying to criticize the archaeological record, but that's important to think about.
Yeah. Well, and like we deal with this in astrology as well. We have documents that survived because this astrologer was sponsored by the Medicis or something to write. We don't know what the Medici said needed to be in that document, but it's what we have to draw from. And, you know, sometimes you have to read between the lines because the astrologer was trying to tell you what was going on, but had to meet the stipulations of the culture that they were writing for because there was somebody looking over their shoulder. So it's not always that history is ill-intentioned in the writing, but also I certainly don't have a biography written about me because nobody knows, right? So it's not written by the people who are living everyday life either. Often what we're getting is whatever society defined as exceptional or extraordinary or let's just do like outro-ordinary, out of the ordinary kind of experience. And so what does that tell us about like, you know, eating bread or how they actually had their daily lives? Archaeology does a good job of trying to get close because you can get more insights on that. But even still, when you find what's left over, it's the people who were able to afford the things that could last too.
100%. Absolutely. And oftentimes we get records of people who observe people living into everyday life, but not people who are living it with them. Like, especially pulling on my experience, because I do a lot of channeling with ancient Rome because that's what I guess I do now.
Constantly. And in a really cool way. It's something to be admired.
I mean, I appreciate that. It was thrust upon me, though. Just let's be 100% clear. Like, I was not the kid that was obsessed with Rome growing up or anything like that. I've seen The Gladiator a total of 1/2 of a time. And so, like, it was never something I was into at all. And now, apparently, that's all I do. So
we're just going to have greatness thrust upon them, Emily.
Just like, I guess this is what I do. But in the case of ancient Rome specifically, the people, like, they did value education very highly. But if you were learning to write, you weren't learning to write so you could write down your day-to-day life. You were learning to write so you could be a merchant, or you were learning to write so that you could communicate with other people, you know, so you could send a letter to your mom that was living, you know, in Greece, and so that you could send her. I mean, like, there wasn't a lot of we're writing to actually write the history sort of thing. And then we'd have characters, like, I say characters because he is a character in my book, but Pliny, the elder, and he'd come in and be like, this is how people lived. And he's like, cool, you're writing this from your villa. Like, this is not, you're observing how people lived. We're observing how people live when you walk through the common streets, and we do get some good insight there, but it's really hard to actually understand how it actually was. So that's a huge benefit of doing channeled history. It's also, like, I will say, doing channeled history, even though it's such a passion of mine, it is very openly critiqued by people, which is fine. Critique it if you want to, but that is why I think it's so important. Is you look, okay, well, let's grab stories from people who weren't ever going to be able to have their stories told, or we get like a very outside perception of their story and dance around it and go. And I personally have an obsession with like just normal people in history. I really, really do. The people who did just the small thing that created the butterfly effect that affected the big things that we would never know about. And so whenever I channel in and tap into someone who's like, oh yeah, I did that, or I did this over here, or whatever it was, I'm like, oh, that actually caused a big deal thing to happen and you have no idea, like, or you didn't care. Which I just think is really important and super duper cool. It's also when we were in Rome, we went to Ostia Antiqua, which is the coolest ruin ever. It's so cool. It's like Pompeii if Pompeii wasn't buried in ash. That's what it is. So everything is like, oh, there's this huge fresco. You can walk over it. It's cool. And you're like, what? Okay. You can explore this entire city. It's huge. Just climbing up and down things, going to the different temples. Like, it's amazing. But it was really cool to me because it was such a neat glimpse into like actual ancient life. And then a lot of the people that I talked to and met there, not people incarnated. So we're talking about ancient people, asking a lot of Ostia redefined what we thought of the Roman world because of what they found there, which I thought was really neat. But then I was able to like talk to like the merchant who did actually trade with the Viking peoples, which they never thought that they did before. But this particular merchant was selling reindeer, and we know that because there's a fresco there. And I got to be like, hey, were you actually selling reindeer? And he was like, yeah. Duh, like that's normal. I don't know what you're talking about. Like thinking that we were just stupid. And I was like, okay, cool, thanks.
Yeah.
I won't bug you anymore. My bad. But just like little things like that, where it's just small everyday things that has the only intact public toilet in the Western world from ancient Rome. Like those kinds of things where it's like, wow, this is like what it felt like. It's really interesting to talk to people there. It redefined what they thought of women as far as how women were allowed to bathe, because there was multiple bathhouses in Ostia, of course, and the big one, fancy one, the one the emperor would bathe in when he was there, basically, they were like, this is definitely only the men's. For years, they were like, this is just obviously just for men, just like all the other super fancy bathhouses. And then the archaeologists came in and they found over 300 hairpins in the drains of this bath. And so it's like, oh, no, it wasn't. So then when I was in my time at Ostia, I met a woman at a brothel. She told me it was a brothel. She was very abrupt about how it was a brothel. It was very much like, yeah, I had sex over there. I had sex over there. I was like, okay, that's nice. Like, go on about your day. But she walked with us to the town, much to Lacusta's chagrin. She was pissed. She wasn't a big fan of hers, not because she has anything against sex workers by any means, but it was just this one particular one she found insufferable and annoying. But she would, narrate different parts of different things, which was really cool to be in that physical place and have that narrated. And it was a whole different color to the history of this place that a lot of people wouldn't have gotten. And I was lucky enough to get it because I was channeling someone in and being like, wow, okay. Like there was this one statue. She's like, that statue, like, I'm glad it's missing a head, because every time that the guy got a new wife, he just carved a new face onto the statue to be like, this is the love of my life. I was like, that tracks. Okay. Yeah. So, just like things like that like wouldn't happen. And I think that's one of the huge benefits of channeled history is like those little tiny baby stories. You know what I mean? The stories that no one else would gather or know.
Especially when you like, I know when I was in Israel, I was on a particular trip that had a particular mission to it.
It did.
And so as we were getting the tour into certain areas that normally you don't have access to, but because we were traveling with a particular person, we had access to these places. I was traveling and talking with a person, an energy who is a guide of mine that also has story there. And so as we're walking along this road, they'd say, this happened here. And I'd be like, did it? Well, yeah, but not like that. Like a lot of interesting insight. In Egypt, our guide was more insightful into some unconventional uses of certain sites and things like that. And, they would give us more context about what it was actually used for, but they had to like take us to the corner and say, I can't be overheard telling you this, because there were people listening to how the dialogue was being shared, because the government wants tourists to understand a certain thing. So it's branding in a sense for them. And I would actually channel with this person and say, this is what I'm getting. That's how I stood in that doorway and got the special like spiritual name thing that we talk about in our intro to Egypt. But I'd stand there and say, this is what I'm getting. And he was able to say, yes, that's accurate to to what he knows
Sorry,
about
I
as well.
just sneezed off camera, like I muted it and I sneezed, and Krista just like blessed me with it. It was sorry, guys.
I didn't want to be rude and not bless you, but I didn't want to, like, I knew you were trying to cover it up.
Story. I was like, I'm trying to be quiet.
Yeah. So, additionally, like I went to Stonehenge once and we had that experience of being able to go inside Stonehenge at sunrise, not on the day of the solstice or equinox or anything, but, I was there and there weren't a lot of people, which was helpful. And I was able to basically see the shadows of the people who would have been walking among there and kind of see what they were up to, which is a little less than what the lore at the time was, because history is also pretty lore.
It's all lore.
Yeah. So I got to see like how tall they were or weren't, and it was very interesting to just be like, oh, wow, that's not what I read, or that's not what the documentaries have said, or all of those things. And then ideally you find a way to try to validate that experience. Like one of the things that I always like to point out and that I appreciate, Emily, as you're doing this is you research your channel history.
Thank you.
You provide here's why this is feasible, as feasible as anything else, or even more so. The data is helpful in that, knowing what exactly it was and being able to support what you're going to claim, as with anything these days, is really important as well.
No, absolutely. And thank you for calling that out. It's really interesting because there is some stuff, like even with research, like I'm never going to be able to corroborate that this particular lady did live in this particular brothel. There's no record of that. Like I'm never going to be able to do that sort of thing. But what I can do is I can give like a general, like, okay, she said this house was like house of a rich guy. Let me look at it. Okay, it definitely was. He was this guy. Cool. That level of cooperation you can definitely do.
Yeah. And you can ask whatever entity you're connecting with. You can say, hey, can you give me something to make sure that I can validate what you're saying to me? And they'll give you, this was the house of a rich person. And then on the wall, you'll see this was the house of a rich person. Perfect.
And you're like, okay, cool. Like, I'm good. Thank you with that. I just in like a obscure, I told you guys that I was in the forum on the Ides of March, which I definitely had asked, like, why the heck was everything getting rearranged? Obviously that was that, but I was like, okay, so like all of these beings I was channeling in, which at the time I was talking to the Vestal Virgins and they were being really cagey, which I was like, what the fuck is going on? Oh, that's why. It's a respect thing. Got it. So it's like validations like that kind of come up. Now there's some things that I'll never be able to validate ever, like other than the fact that I channeled it. Like we were walking down a street and LaCusta was like, I killed someone over there. And I was like, that's nice. It's a bakery.
Yeah.
Like, okay. And she's like, well, it wasn't a bakery then. Like, God, like, I'm like, okay, but like, I can't validate that. Rome's been through so many changes. It's a whole lasagna. And I do want to point out, like, you don't have to be in the place to channel history. Like, I did not have to go to Rome to channel in these beings. You did not have to go to Israel or Egypt. I mean, I've talked to LaCusta for years now, not in Rome, and that's fine. I will, whenever history does come up, when there's a big archaeological find, like I recently channeled in Cleopatra, and I want to be really clear, I am not super passionate about channeling in leaders or big historical figures, because honestly they don't have a lot of story to tell. I mean, they do, but it's all just like, yeah, okay. A lot of the time it's like, yeah, okay, I get it. I'm more interested in reclaiming stories of people who had their stories taken from them, specifically women, minorities. That means a lot more to me. Now, Cleopatra did in a lot of ways, but she was also brilliant as fuck. So smart. And with this news of like, oh, maybe her tomb was found, she was like, yeah, I waited for a woman. And was just kind of like deadpan. And I was like, oh, you definitely planned this. She was like, yeah, like if my name was going to live on more than my husband's, basically, was what she was going for, then I needed to make this a mystery that no one could find me. This was very intentional. Like, look, it's 2,000 years later and you're still talking about me. Like, this was I planned this.
Yeah.
Which is like cool and validating, but it's just not always my favorite thing to like reclaim in that way. You know what I mean? But I do try to lean into that as well from time to time. But
and that helps, because again, it exercises your skills, because that is something you can get validation on. It is something that because it makes the headlines, you can say, oh, cool, I know I'm still accountable. I'm still on a good track with my integrity here. Now, the other stuff that I can't always prove as much, I can trust a little bit more. And you learn how to research more because you have access to research to these larger figures or more prominent in society figures.
I will also say though, and this is from doing countless research, and you can't see, but I'm literally surrounded by Rome books because I was tearing. I know, it's just like, wow, okay. There's so many books about Rome around you. Like I have that ancient Roman cookbook up here. Like I'm just like very in it. There is very, like, I love the internet in a lot of ways, but you're not going to get a replacement for books when it comes to researching these things. It's just not. Wikipedia is fine. But it's very opinionated based on the person that originally wrote the article. So if you need resources, if you are like interested in doing channeled history stuff, or if there's a specific period of time, just ask your guides, be like, okay, help me find a book. I will also say you will oftentimes find books and be like, okay, this is definitely a good resource. Look at what date it was published. Not because necessarily everything's changed, but it's going to be easier for you to understand the biases that are in the book if you understand what was going on during that time period. So like I have a book around here it's about Antonia Augusta, which honestly is not a super great resource because there's a lot of assumption that the person is taking, like, oh, this is this, so we assume she probably had a villa here, and it's like, well, it's not history, but okay. But it was like, oh, when was this written? Oh, it was written in 1998. Okay, cool. They really didn't have all of these technologies where we can, like, put a machine on the earth and see what's beneath it and do all these different stuff. Like that wasn't there. So of course there's some assuming that has to kind of come up. And then meanwhile, I have another book, which I love this book. It's such a good resource, but dude is fat phobic so bad throughout this whole book. Like so bad. And I was like, when was this written? Cool. 2014. He should know better by now. So I can like gonna criticize that element of it, but it's a super helpful resource. So just keep that in mind, just if you are doing history, any sort of research at all. Like you can't find your astrology stuff outside of text. Like history stuff it's in books. It's in books.
It's there,
which is just important to remember.
And it's also important to remember that the story is malleable. One person that you might be channeling is going to give you one side. Another person might give you another side. That's how we got history. We got one side of the story and we're looking for the other side, especially in this context. But even that person is going to have biases and all these other things that they have on their own. So just be very open-minded to changing your perspective. Like, I say this with any influential figure that you tend to align with. Don't think that they're like your best friends because they don't know you. And like, don't like hook your belief system onto what this one person says, because they're one of bajillions. Like there are so many stories out there to understand, and you can get multiple perspectives. And I recommend it when you can, unless you're like highlighting a certain person's experience, like with Lacosta. But if you're looking for like what actually happened, you're going to want to be investigative. And it's really important to keep that in mind.
And the truth is, it's more about the process than it is about the final results when it comes to channeling people in and talking to them about it. Because at the end of the day, I mean, even if you get what you think is the best version of the truth, there's probably more to it too. So don't be like, I need to know this exact thing, because 7 different people are going to come in and tell you 7 different things about the thing that happened, and none of them are going to be exactly accurate. So like, that's the element of it too. So it's kind of like a reconstruction. So it's more about the process than it is about the goal. The other thing I want to say on that, because that was a really good point to bring up. And I've actually had a lot of people be like, well, why wouldn't that person know? Like I was talking about how the library at Herculaneum, they're like really finally able to read a lot of those scrolls at that library because of the technology that's developed. And they're going really slowly because they have to go really slowly and read those scrolls and books. But it's probably the only place on the surface of the earth that still would have a copy of Agrippina's biography, which I would die for. I want it so bad. But I asked her and she was like, I don't know if it's there, because it didn't matter to her in life. So she was like, I don't care. Like, I don't know. I wrote it so that like Nero would know what would happen to me if they killed me in exile. Like, I really don't give a shit. It wasn't that important to me, even though it's important to me. So I couldn't get any more information. I tried to talk to librarians there. Like, we don't know. We don't know what's been destroyed and what's not been destroyed, because they're still fallible people and it's still their experience. And I think that's really important to notice, because people will be like, well, haven't they died and haven't they looked back and seen everything and whatever? And I'm like, no, they lived that truth. Why are they're not going to go back and be like, okay, well, where's my this and that? And like, I've watched the entirety of all of Earth spin out since then. Like, nope.
And like, if we think about this as they're just like us, are you doing that? Are you keeping in mind what someone 2000 years from now is going to need to know about your hair care routine or about, the minutia of your everyday life? Probably not, because I wouldn't want people in my business, especially right now. And what I'm going to write down for posterity is going to be something that I want people to know, which may not include embarrassing tidbits about my daily life. So if you think about history as actually reading someone's journal instead of the account of events, it gets even more intricate.
Yeah, it's very intricate. So that is why it's like, no, I can't just channel in and get the answer to this question. I hope that it's there. She said that, like, yeah, it's the right time period. I think there probably was a copy there at some point. And I was like, cool, that's good enough for me, because that is good enough, because I'm not getting anything else. Like, there's no way I'm going to get anything else from that. So just keeping that kind of thing in mind as well, with channeled history. And that's why it's not an exact science, but it's another way to add layers to our human narrative. And for a while, I was really, really, really struggling with, like, why do I want to do this so badly? Like, this is something that speaks so much to my soul, but like, what's the point? I had a very dear friend of mine, their sibling is an archaeologist. They're studying to be an archaeologist. And the reason they're studying to be an archaeologist, which I had a conversation with them about it. And they were like, well, I'm trying to find a way to use archaeological tools to identify skeletal remains from current natural disasters, to help people now. Which I was like, that's fucking incredible. But they're like, yeah, I just don't see a lot of use in, figuring out what trades routes worked across North America 10,000 years ago. Like, that doesn't matter very much to me. And it kind of caused a little bit of an existential crisis for me, because I'm sitting there like, yeah, but all I'm doing is that. Like, what, like, that matters so much to me, but why? And I was really struggling with that for a while. And I finally came to the conclusion of like, oh, it's reparenting. It's the same reason you do inner child work. It's just doing inner child work for our history. That's why it matters to me, because if I channel in and I get these stories, even if I don't write them down, even just if I'm just the one person that they tell, that creates a ripple that changes the dynamic of the energy on planet, because finally their story has actually been connected to in some way, even if it's not a big way, it's just some little tiny way. And that actually is a version of reparenting. And the more that we can do that, the more we can gather these stories, the more we can experience something that hasn't been experienced for thousands of years, and actually just acknowledge that, like, okay, I see this, I see you, thank you for sharing that. That creates actual changes, the same way that reparenting your inner child does, which kind of renewed my spirit into that space as well.
And that's so appropriate for right now. We need that, as like society needs reparenting.
Yeah,
it just does.
That's what we're doing. That's the goal here with channeled history stuff. And it's very interesting, because there is time periods where I've chatted a little bit with the people who've come forward to me, that have passed, from those time periods, people that I've wanted to just be like, hey, could you just tell me about this really quick? But I haven't yet done the research to back up a lot of it. So I don't always come forward and say like this, and this. I kind of throw it in a journal and I'm like, cool, thank you. Like, later on, when I have time to dive into like this specific pocket of world history at this specific time, I can chat about it. Sometimes, though, I will say in readings and stuff, I will have guides be like, oh, I lived here with them in this, and like, we're doing past life stuff, or even if we're not doing past life stuff, but it's just like perhaps a deity that walked on planet during a certain time. They're like, oh, I walked on planet over here. This is why this would happen. And I'd be like, okay, cool. Awesome. And I usually take that as pretty solid validation. If I'm channeling someone else's guide and that comes in, I'm like, okay, awesome. But unless I research it, I don't usually talk too terribly much about it. So know that like when stuff comes up that I am doing channeled history wise, it's usually because there's some sort of bearing that I've at least gotten some level of validation with my channeling, because I think that's important.
I think so too. I think validation. I mean, again, a lot of people will remember a couple months ago now, I posted about like who my major influence as an intuitive was growing up, and it was John Edwards. And the thing that I really loved was there was like a 3-word phrase that he always said. It was communicate, appreciate, validate. Boom. And do the same thing with history. Do the same thing with any energy you connect with. Do the same thing with an energy, whether it is previously living, has never lived, or is currently living. I think we should do that all the time. And I think that was actually one of the things he would end crossing over with, would be like, remember, with all of your loved ones here or on the other side, communicate, appreciate, validate. Wow. I did not know that was like a core memory for me, but there it is.
Yeah. That's very sweet. Also just like fun. If you're like, I'd love to talk to people in the ancient past. Cool. It's like the same thing as talking to your guides. Just have more boundaries, just be like, hey, I'd like to talk to you about this. And you can do it through channeled writing. You can do it through your just knowing sense. You can do it through images. I mean, there's a million different ways, the same way you would talk to your guides. So there's like that premise there. I will say though, one of my favorite things to do, if you are watching a history documentary in any capacity, about a certain time period, ask for either someone who really didn't like the main focus of the documentary or someone who lived during that time or whatever to come watch it with you, because the narration you will get is
the
phenomenal.
Commentary. Yeah, absolutely.
Or you can get What Happens to Me, and LaCusta will just turn it off if she hates it. Like just straight, like my husband's seen it too. He's been like, oh, LaCusta didn't like this Roman documentary. Nope. Funny thing though, she actually this is so funny. This is so random. So a long time ago, I watched Spartacus, the show, when I was recovering from my abuse, and I was like really needing shows. And so that was like one that I just kind of like gravitated towards and just watched. It's awful. Like, let's just be 100%. It's not a good show. I mean, it's fine, but it's whatever. But I was like, I'm gonna watch this again. And like Hester was like quiet the whole time. I was like, oh no, like what's gonna happen? Like, I just watched the first episode just kind of to poke fun at her, to be 100% honest, because I'm like, it's so wildly extravagant. And it's right after she passed. Like, well, technically she was like kind of still alive during that time. Like, it's like right in her time period. That the whole Spartacus rebellion happened. And she was kind of quiet. And at the end of it, I was like, what do you think? She's like, well, you know how you watch that trashy reality television? I was like, yeah. She's like, this is that. I was like, okay. So I just thought that was funny. So just to highlight that. Yeah. But that is a wonderful, it's super fun. It's super duper fun to do that with people. And I mean, follow your interests. If you're really interested in a specific time period, chat to people from that time period.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be there. But that being said, we are going to be in some very fun ancient places over the next
that being said, you could be.
That being said, you could be. I mean, yeah, I think currently the trips that we have up are all sold out, but stay tuned for more information of other stuff that is probably coming very soonish. That being said, if you are going on either the Ireland, Greece, or Egypt trip, we're doing a lot of channeled history stuff, remote viewing stuff, talking to the beings that are there or were there stuff too. So that's going to be particularly fun. Particularly fun. Cool.
And if you want to channel in a story and you feel like this resonates with you a lot and you want to write it down in a fiction book, pitch the Forgotten Storytellers.
Yes, please do. I'm seeing if there's any questions in the Patreon, because something that our patrons get to do is ask us questions, which is awesome. Cool. I'm not seeing any. Oh, wait. Hold on. No, I think we're doing good.
Okay. Yeah. So makes sense. We'll probably have a lot of questions next week after the eclipse and Mercury retrograde and all those things. But if you want to be able to ask a question and you want to make sure that we do see it and we will be able to address it, that's the best way to do it. People in Patreon get to ask us questions, vote on topics for podcasts and all these things. And plus, we just really like being able to see you guys there. You guys are the coolest, sweetest people ever. So,
oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah. That's a really great way for us to be able to answer your questions.
Yeah, we love that too. It's super duper helpful. Oh, someone did ask something.
Oh,
sorry, just really, really quick, which I see.
This is Mercury retrograde already in action.
I know. I don't know why it like unorganized my post. I scrolled from the top down and then I got to a more recent post and there was a question, which made no fucking sense, but we're there.
Interesting.
Positive ways to move through anger. Let it wash through me if it wants to consume me, or put a lid on it, or just let it boil over, ? I'm realizing and learning about healthy boundaries that I have been letting anger be my protection for too long and I'm exhausted. Any tips?
Yeah. This is so fascinating. I was just talking to one of my regular clients about this on Friday, because there's two ways you can go about this. My first instinct is witness the anger, interview the anger, ask the anger what it's actually there for, what it needs, and then address those needs. But at the same time, process the anger. I know a lot of us, myself included, when we're going through a hard time, we are so focused on avoiding feeling things that we don't want to feel. Even if we're like, I'm witnessing my feelings, I know it's there, I know why it's there, it still needs to move through you. Because when we don't process something, we don't get to learn from it. And also in a more tangible way, it could become trauma. It could be a repeated thing that then makes us uncomfortable the next time and the next time and the next time. Like I said, I was just bringing this up this week. And of course, with my clients, we do astrology, but also channeling. So I got kind of called out with this client. It was one of those clients that reflects things at you that you're also going through. And it was just like, you're holding space for a lot of other people. You're trying to be fair. You're trying to be nice. You're trying to be sweet or whatever. Like, also ask yourself why you can't show that anger. If there's
That's
a
what I
good
was
reason,
gonna say.
yeah, if there's a good reason, fine, but find a way to process it. Find a way to give it an outlet. Find a way to let it through and release it. So it's kind of a both and situation. You want to feel it. You want to interview it. You want to ask it what's going on. Give it a name if you need to give that separation. But then at another point, you need to bring it back into you, and you need to let it be a part of you, because it was, and it is.
I fully agree with that. The other thing I would always say too is, if it is a source of protection, what is it protecting, and how can you fortify that area? How can you help that area? Is it just you? Is it your core beliefs? Is it something you don't want to let go of? Like, what is it protecting? Because oftentimes with anger, if you identify what it's protecting and validate that space and make that space really strong, you'll notice the anger starts to go away naturally if it is a protection defense sort of situation.
Yeah. And what that looks like is you can literally see, you can literally say, I'm angry. And if there's someone with you, you can start ranting to them, because when you say, I'm angry, can you just listen to me for a second? Start talking about all the things that make you angry. Talk about the first thing, the second thing, and then by the third thing, that's probably what you're actually angry about. So you can do this thing. It's called the 5 whys. And you just say, this is a statement. Why? And just be a kid and ask yourself why. By the time you get to that 5th why, you've uncovered what the source is. And it's really
you're deep, like you're deep by that 5th why.
Don't want to leave you hanging on the, like, feel your feelings. How to do that is interview yourself, figure out the source, and then address the source.
I will also say too, oftentimes we think it's anger and then we get into it and it's not anger.
It's usually fear. I mean, it's very
or honestly, like sadness too. Like there's like a loss,
rejection, resentment can be one that builds up a lot. And when I work with theta healing and with even in integrated energy therapy with people who have like physical ailments that we're working through, resentment gets so stuck in the body.
Oh God, yes. It very much does. Yesterday I did a 2-hour-long breath workshop. It was great. Love breath work. Big fan. But that was a big one. It wasn't resentment necessarily, but it was like one specific breathing session we did, and it was to unleash stuck emotions. And it was so interesting because you'd go to breathe out and your breath would get stuck in a certain part in your body, and you'd have to do it again and again until it stopped getting stuck there, which is just like, that's the level, like you get a physical response to stuck emotions. That's the level they stick at. So just keep that in mind.
And this just goes to show there are multiple ways to do it. We've listed about 3, which is cool.
So sending love there. Absolutely. And we do have some other questions on this post, which we can answer next time. But thank you all so much for listening and tuning in. Please give us your thoughts on channeled history and your thoughts on anything we talked about here today. We hope you're okay after the eclipse in the Mercury retrograde. Take things slowly. That's how Mercury retrograde works. You need to take things slowly. That's usually like the breaking of things is usually to make you take things more slowly. So lean into that. And of course, if you want to join our Patreon, we'd love to have you there. But we hope that you take all of this energy, this little break of big astrology stuff, and you
go make some magic.
I like it.
Okay. If you like it, I like it. We're in this together.
I love it.